All right, y'all. So Matthew chapter 23. This is a long one, so it's probably going to be more than one part. So sorry in advance. So we're going to start with the chapter context. So Matthew 23 concludes with Matthew's multi-chapter account of all Jesus' interactions in the temple during the last week before his arrest and crucifixion. After silencing the religious leaders with parables and brilliant responses, Matthew 21 through 22, he pronounces God's judgment on the scribes and Pharisees in a series of seven woe to you statements. Jesus mourns for the judgment that will come to Jerusalem for her rejection of God. This leads Jesus to leave the temple, sadly remarking on its impending destruction. Matthew 24 1 through 2. As disciples ask about this, Jesus begins an extended teaching on the end times in chapter 24. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this breakdown. What does Matthew chapter 23 mean? Other than the introductory sentence, this passage is entirely words of Christ as with John chapter 17. This begins a stretch in Matthew's gospel running through the beginning of chapter 26, which is almost entirely words spoken by Jesus. In the prior chapter, Jesus silenced the religious leaders with his astonishing responses to their questions. Here in chapter 23, he begins to describe various ways in which the scribes and Pharisees have failed in their God-given roles in leading the people. Jesus begins by acknowledging that the scribes and Pharisees can carry a certain level of legitimate authority. They sit metaphorically speaking on the seat of Moses. Jesus does not tell the people to rebel against these leaders. Rather, he warns Israel not to imitate their hypocrisy. This begins a systematic takedown of their heart motives and spiritual blindness. Matthew 23, 1 through 3. Many were impressed by the Pharisees' religious deeds. Christ condemns how the scribes and Pharisees behave. However, since they do everything for the wrong reasons, their motive is not sincere, humble service to God, but to be seen and approved by other people. Above all, Jesus says these religious leaders live to be noticed, respected, and praised. They show off by making their wearable articles of worship ostentatious. Okay, now that was a big word for me. They jockey for the most prestigious seats at feasts and in the temple. They love to be called by their official titles in the marketplace. Jesus bluntly condemns these attitudes and tells his followers not to make the same mistake. Matthew 23, 4 through 12. At this point, Jesus pronounces God's judgment on these men. This comes through a series of seven woe statements about their hypocrisy. The term woe is more or less kept intact from the Greek O-U-A-I. I'm not even going to sit there and try. The word is like other exclamations such as alas or oh. English speakers might imagine Jesus shaking his head while saying, oh, this is bad, to capture the feel of this term. Just as sounds like ha express triumph, that word O-U-A-I expresses grief. Okay, so the first woe. This is the first of many times in this chapter where Jesus calls the scribes and Pharisees hypocrites. This is derived from the Greek term hypocrites, I don't know, which literally refers to stage actors. These are people who behave in pretended artificial ways and entirely different from their real thoughts. In this case, these are leaders who tell people to do something while they themselves do the opposite. Their faulty leadership slams the doors of eternity in people's faces. Their choice will not lead them to heaven, and those who follow their example will be lost as well. Matthew chapter 23, verse 13. Verse 14 is seen as some translations is not found in the older manuscripts of Matthew's. It repeats a statement Jesus expressed in Mark 12 verse 40. Here we go. In Luke 20:41, The statement expressed that the verse is true but not likely original to Matthew's text, Matthew 23:14. Second woe. Israel religious leaders put considerable effort into convincing others of their views. The proselytes referred to here might be Gentile converts to Judaism, or Jewish converts to the Pharisaical sect. All of these accomplishments ultimately is that the convert are also damned. Jesus says such people are twice the children of hell, since they're following false teachings and follow a false faith. Matthew 23:15. Third woe. Jesus now calls the Pharisees and scribes blind guides. This is a criticism he has used before, Matthew 15:12-14, and then John 9:39-41. Blindness is often used in scripture to symbolize those who reject God's message, making it impossible for them to perceive what is spiritually true. In this case, Christ points to their irrational approach to vows. Logically, swearing by any of the sacred objects would amount to swearing by God in heaven. Instead, the scribes and Pharisees imply that some oaths can be easily broken, a practice Jesus has also condemned, Matthew 5:33-37. Attempting to create loopholes in one's integrity is not only dishonest but also foolish, Matthew 23:16-22. Fourth woe. These religious leaders carefully give 10% of their crops, even in the tiniest herbs. This was not wrong, as it means applying the law of Moses to the tiniest details of their lives. However, the other details of the scribes and Pharisees' teachings left enormous aspects of God's law unresolved. Their emphasis was on legalism, technicalities, and wooden literalism. Instead, they should have put equal emphasis on justice, mercy, and faithfulness. This error is as absurd as using a screen to clear insects out of clear drinking water while swallowing a massive animal. Matthew 23:23-24. Fifth woe. The scribes and Pharisees are committed to their public image. They go to great lengths to look good to other people. However, their spiritual state is one of hypocrisy and death. This is like wiping the outside of cups and dishes while leaving the inside filthy. Echoing his other teachings on the subject, Matthew 15:11, Jesus tells them to clean the inside first, and then the outside will follow. Matthew 23:25-26. The sixth woe. Using a second, even more graphic analogy, Jesus contrasts the Pharisees and scribes' outer appearance with their inner spirits. Grave sites in that era were often covered in lime and had some decorative objects. These were appealing to the eye but did not change the decay and death under the surface. In the same way, the hypocrites in Israel's religious leaders used pious outward actions to cover their inner hypocrisy and lawlessness. Matthew 23:27-28. All right, come back for part 2.